Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I'm very excited to be here with all of you in person and online to celebrate the book, My Child is Trans, Now What? A Joy-Centered Approach to Support. We're here with the author, Ben V. Greene, in conversation with Ben Ackerley. Ben Ackerley is the current acting president of Transparent Atlanta, which is an organization that we work with a lot here at Karis and Karis Circle. Today's event is co-sponsored by PFLAG, Transparent, and Pride Atlanta. Thank you so much to all of those organizations for being with us. I'm going to let folks know who are watching that they may need to refresh their browsers because they may not know that. One sec, y'all. Sorry. We do so much to support trans people throughout the course of our lives here at Karis, from birth to death. We talk about the right of being self-determining from birth to death as an inherently feminist right. It is something we think a lot about. We think that individuals know our bodies better than anyone else. And that's something that extends to the self-determination of children, right? And as parents, thinking through how we support children in their own self-knowing is something that, whether your child is trans or not, is something that we really think a lot about and value and care deeply about here at Karis. And so we're always looking for books that support parents in figuring out how to support children. So we're really glad that this book exists, Ben. I'm going to first introduce Ben Ackerley. Ben Ackerley is a non-binary activist and parent of a transgender child fighting for LGBTQ plus equality in Georgia. They are building strong queer communities through the Georgia chapter of Transparent, Georgia Rainbow Families, and as a committee chair with Atlanta Pride. Transparent is a national organization dedicated to supporting the parents and caregivers of transgender and gender expansive kids. Ben serves as co-leader of the Georgia chapter of Transparent and the coordinator for the Transparent National Support Groups. And they are joined by Ben Greene. Ben Greene is a trans man, transgender activist, and educator who has spoken internationally on topics surrounding transgender inclusion. After coming out at 15 in small town Connecticut and giving a popular TEDx talk at Brandeis University, Ben has devoted his career to spreading empathy, education, and storytelling around the trans experience. He's spoken for companies, hospitals, schools, religious organizations, and government entities, sharing what it means to be transgender and how to show up as an ally. He is a fierce advocate for transgender youth, regularly speaking in their defense at the Missouri State Capitol. And when he is not speaking during working hours, he is delivering free presentations to parent support groups around the country and spending hours one-on-one with families of newly out transgender loved ones. He's passionate about educating others from a place of compassion, no matter where they're starting from, and lives by the catchphrase, "The only question I won't answer is the question you don't ask." So thank you so much to everybody who's watching with us. That means that you should feel free to ask questions. I know Ben Ackerley has many wonderful questions prepared, but if you're watching virtually, you can put your questions in the chat at any time. And if you're here with us in person, I'll bring a microphone to you if you have questions. But without further ado, please put your hands together to welcome the Bens for this discussion.
Thank you, ER, and thank you, Ben, so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This is so surreal. I've been working on this book for 6 years. So the fact that I am actually here talking about it, holding it, people are buying it, and I'm eventually at some point going to see a little bit of a piece of that. It's all so cool.
Well, thank you for writing this. I got a chance to read this over the last couple of weeks, and it's both really practical, it's really understandable, and I related to so many things, both as like a non-binary person, as the parent of a trans kid, and also as somebody who works with a lot of parents. I kept being surprised and delighted at how many of the things you captured that I feel like are a part of that experience as a parent of discovering your child and accepting who they are and kind of coming to terms with that. I'd love to learn a little, I want to talk about the book, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and kind of how you became an advocate, an educator as your job.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it by accident. I was originally in school for elementary education, and before then, I had been advocating just kind of by necessity. When I came out, it was in 2015 in a time and a place where transgender was not a word anybody was using. And so I needed to build all my support systems as I realized I needed them. We didn't have inclusive health curriculum, so I'm teaching the health classes. Our guidance staff wasn't equipped to support trans youth in crisis, so I'm training the guidance staff. I was writing our policies, forming and leading our student groups, holding all of these roles that should have been filled with multiple adults. And so I really learned a lot about advocacy and had been doing it because I didn't have a whole lot of a choice, and found that I happened to be pretty good at it as well. And then I got to college and had an opportunity to give a TEDx talk. And I gave that talk that was just about everything I had learned about trans identities, non binary identities, how to show up as an ally. And I was said, this will be a nice closing to the chapter of my work as an advocate. And then I can go work as a third grade teacher instead. And instead, it blew up on Facebook. And a couple of companies saw it and said, wow, this is so cool. Do you do this professionally? And I said, oh, sure. And they said, we'll even give you $100. And I was like, wow, that's like a month of ramen. This is awesome. And so I started taking the train to see all these companies, and I would do my classes, and then I would go and give a couple of presentations. And after my second or third presentation, I was in the car with my dad, and I said, I feel like I have an opportunity here to do a whole lot of good. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I think I owe it to myself and to my community to give this a try, to see if I can make this into a career. And so I left my education program. I decided to graduate college a year early. Graduated in February of 2020. I filed the paperwork to become a public speaker, and then there was no public. So that was interesting. But it gave me a lot of space to do a lot of virtual events because companies were like, well, everybody's at home. We might as well do a webinar. So all of a sudden I was getting to do these speaking events and connecting with more and more people. And I graduated in the summer of 2020 and pretty much haven't looked back. I moved to St. Louis with my wife in that same summer when she started medical school. So I also learned a lot about advocacy and got more involved in politics, which we can also talk more about later. But I really just have my catchphrase. I have a lot of catchphrases. I'm very much like a comic book character. But one of my catchphrases is maximize your good. And so everywhere that I went, it was, all right, I think I could do a lot of good in the corporate space. And then I said, I think I can actually do a lot of good in the family space and in parent support groups, and started getting more involved with PFLAG. So everything I do is just me saying, I think this is a space where I could do a whole lot good and do even more good than I was doing yesterday. And so I fell into it a little bit and have made up a lot of it as I've gone, and have been fortunate that I've been able to coach a lot of people who now say, I want to do what you do. And so I share with them everything that I know, because I have no competition, only people who are by my side fighting for the same goals. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. We're not in this on our own. We're all working together.
It takes all of us.
That's very true. So you've been doing this for a number of years now, and you've been writing this book. Have you been working on this the whole time, or was this a recent project? What led to writing this book?
Yeah, it was in the back of my mind for a long time. And I think I started the idea in 2018 of writing a book because I'm just a big nerd. I love books. And so the idea came to me in 2018, and I started slowly working on it. And then in 2021, I got really involved with PFLAG. I set out on a mission. It didn't start out this formal, but I eventually decided that I wanted to try to do a free speaking engagement for every single PFLAG chapter in the country. So I sent 425 emails individually to each PFLAG chapter. I was expecting to hear back from like 10 of them. I heard back from 100. And so I spent almost every week for a year and a half on the phone with a different PFLAG chapter, speaking to their members. And I still do PFLAG events whenever and wherever possible, as free as I can make it for the group. If it's virtual, totally free, or, we figure something out. And through that, I was hearing so many of the same questions. And then I would talk to the members, and then somebody would call me the next day and we'd talk one-on-one. And so the more parents I was talking to, the more I realized, hey, I've got a lot to say here. And they would say, what resources are available? And when I would try to pull together books and resources for these families, so often the books that I found were either written by cisgender people and really centering the parents and centering this grief and this negativity, or had a lot of judgment, had a lot of, if you don't know this by now, come on, what are you doing? A lot of kind of anger at the people who were reading them, so many of the parents called me because they said the resources that are out there are just not doing it for me. They are not what I need. So I said, I think we really need a book that is written from a trans perspective of someone who was a trans kid and is now a trans adult, that still, I had a lot of conversations with parents of trans kids, including my own parents that are worked into this. But I really wanted to write a book that was joyful, that was trans-centered, and kept the kid at the center of a parent's experience and of that journey. So it's been on and off a couple of years, but 2021 was the year that I really started to focus a lot of time and effort on making this real.
Yeah. No, you really did that so well in the book. I mentioned this briefly, but I facilitate a lot of parent support groups, and one of my favorite parts about that is when a new family joins, when a new parent comes in who has known their child as trans for some time, but has maybe not connected with other families, or maybe decided now is the time that they needed to connect with other families. And the conversation is every conversation is different, but there are a lot of the same themes that come throughout. Understanding terminology, understanding centering your child in this, and that, really at the core of it, it's our job as parents to love and support our children no matter what. And I feel like you just covered so many of those things so well in here. You wove in personal stories, but really it felt like I was sitting in a small group. It felt like I was sitting in a group. And for everyone who hasn't read this book, I highly recommend this, no matter where you are on your journey as a parent or caregiver, or even an ally. I think that this is so well written and so open to anyone who's anywhere on the journey. You can connect with the book. You mentioned just now the focus on joy. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because you specifically talk about joy-centered parenting and affirming your child. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that was so crucial to me in putting this book together. And I told my publisher, joy has to be on the cover. It has to be in the subtitle. We tried 100 different subtitles, but they all had to have the word joy in them, because so often it feels to me like our conversation around supporting transgender and LGBTQ plus youth begins and ends at suicide statistics. We talk about anxiety, we talk about depression, and there's a fire lit under parents of trans and queer kids. We have a very, very clear picture of what we're moving away from. And that's great, that's helpful, but that means that when we talk about things like regret, that's a really effective boogeyman. We stop in our tracks because all we know is that we're running away from something. This is just one more thing to be afraid of. What direction do I run now? There's so much regret that we're willing to stomach in our life. I think a lot about medical school, and I'll probably mention medical school again because my wife is a medical student and I'm obsessed with her, as anyone with a wife should be. I'm obsessed with this woman. She's awesome. And so when somebody that you love says, I want to go to medical school, you say, wow, that's so cool. I know that's going to be a lot of work, but I'm sure you can do it. We're excited for them. We're proud of them. We don't often bring up that there's an average $250,000 of student loan debt. Last year, only 52% of physicians would choose to become a physician again. But we help support our people in going to medical school because we understand what they stand to gain if they're right. So many risks that we take all the time because we know what we're moving towards. College majors, most people don't use their college majors. I majored in computer science. There's no coding in this. But my college experience, I got so many things that I didn't expect to out of that journey. My critical thinking, my relationships, my sense of independence. I learned a lot in college, even if it wasn't what I expected to learn. So when we talk about trans and queer identities, it's important to know what we're moving away from. I do not pull any punches and say that everything is perfect and it's all sunshine and rainbows, but it is crucial to say, what are we building? What do we stand to gain by supporting and loving our trans, non-binary, and gender-expansive family members? And so that also means that we're not just focusing on the problems to be solved. A lot of the books that are out there are like, all right, here are the 100 problems that come up. Good luck. Try not to cry too much. It's going to be fine, I guess. I also talk about here are the problems that come up, and here are ways to infuse joy into the situation, because this is not just your trans kid. This is a kid. Kids should be joyful and curious and exploratory. They should get to be kids and immature and impatient because they're not just short adults. They're kids. We want to let them be kids. And even transgender adults also shouldn't have to fight all the time. It's not all about solving problems. And so, as a great example of one of those joy exercises, throughout the book, I have a problem that comes up, and then I say, here's a way to talk about that with your loved one, and here's a joy exercise. So, family photos is a big one that comes up, and people focus a lot on what they're losing. Do I have to take down every picture in my house because my kid is trans now? And that is a question that you want to talk to your kid about. You want to make sure your family member feels seen when they walk through your house. I feel less seen in the pictures of me with braces than I do in the pictures of me as a woman, but that's not as relevant. So yes, we want to take down some pictures, but then I have a joy exercise that says everybody dress up, find clothes and hair and makeup that make everybody feel seen and affirmed, and become a tourist in your hometown. It could be a Sears. It could be a parking lot with a really nice rose bush. It could be anywhere. Take pictures where everybody feels seen and hang up new pictures in your house. What are you gaining? Throughout this book, there are so many of these joy exercises and moments that say, hey, I'm going to pause you because this is a really intense moment, an intense feeling. How can we infuse some joy into this? How can we make sure that this isn't just a painful process, but it can be fun? It can be lovely. And there is a future that we're moving towards. There are millions of transgender adults out there who are happy, who are married, who have lives, who have dogs and homes and careers. I know non-binary astronauts and transgender pilots, and that isn't something that we talk about, but we are everywhere. So making sure that families know what we're building also makes us so much stronger in our resistance to this regret boogeyman and into the other things we're fighting against. It fuels us much more to know what we're moving towards than what we're running away from. So joy is everything to me.
Well, and it to me it empowers our kids too, and adults. They're one of the joy exercises that that I am not going to try at home, but I think everyone should. And you probably know which one I'm going for. But you were talking about having family members or people close to your family that maybe are struggling with pronouns or struggling to use the right name. And one of the joy exercises was to did I understand this correctly? Give your child a squirt bottle and tell them they can squirt the person who got their pronouns wrong. I love this, and I am not introducing it.
Listen, it's great. It's a funny solution. And there's so much weight that takes off, right? To come up with a new way every time someone uses the wrong pronouns to say, hey, those aren't my pronouns. Again and again, it feels heavy. But to just do a little like, oh, gotcha. Most grandmas are waterproof. We're all going to be fine. Having that little system, it makes it funny. It makes it visible. It makes it just a little bit undesirable for the people who are doing it. It's a great reminder that brings in some levity. It doesn't all have to be serious. It doesn't all have to be heavy. Solutions can also be fun.
Yes. No, I love that. It's a lot of times in groups, we will talk about how to communicate to our kids when maybe a grandparent or doesn't understand pronouns and changing pronouns and names. And so a lot of that conversation, I know some people have used the analogy like they just don't understand, like they're not up to speed on gender. They're not on team gender yet. I think adding that extra element to make it silly takes it, like you said, from a very serious thing to something that empowers the kid. You gave another example of a pronoun jar that someone could put a quarter or a dollar in. I think that would be a big hit in my house as well.
Yeah, and then you give the jar to the kid and they get ice cream because they probably deserve it if that jar is full.
Well, tell me, you shared a lot of really like personal stories throughout the book, and this really feels like a primer. Like you could have left all of that out and just gone detailed, and it still would have been super helpful, but you made it really relatable. Was that kind of the plan as you formulated it, or did that come about as you were writing it? I was really curious.
Yeah, I have always been at first, above anything else, I am a professional storyteller. Stories are what move us, are what connect us. And, you know, there's a wonderful quote, which is people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. The stories that we tell are so much of a connection. And there's a line in the beginning of the book that says, I share all of these stories because I'm opening as many windows into my life as I can, because some of those windows are going to look a whole lot more like a mirror. You might see some of yourself in me. including sharing stories about my triumphs and my fears and my embarrassing moments. Those just make it feel more real, make it feel a little less scary, make it more interesting and entertaining to read, and help parents feel like they're not the first one to be on this journey. As a fun fact about this book, it feels very conversational. I really wanted it to read like the way that I speak. And so I dictated a lot of the book. And I got a note from my copy editor right before we went to print. She was doing a last read through. She said, Ben, there's one other joke that didn't really land. Like, could you explain it or edit it? And we had gotten very used to her pointing out, like, I think this is only funny to you. I am my target audience for my own sense of humor. So she said, I don't think I get this one. And it was a line in the middle of the page that it was in the middle of a sentence about like correcting people about pronouns. And it said, Oliver spit that out. And she was like, I don't think I get what that means. I had been dictating the book while walking my dog, and he was eating a stick, and I almost published that. So it is a very conversational book because I dictated it. If you hear anything else about Oliver, he is a dog. Don't worry about it. Please don't tell me. I don't want to know about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
It is you cover so many things. You cover kind of the, first of all, terminology and things that I honestly, even as a non-binary person, when I first began to explore my own gender as an adult, I didn't know a lot of those terms, like you were kind of speaking when you first came out. So you cover that, and then you go through the coming out process and what that looks like in different scenarios. And one of the things I really liked, and really, does that mean?
Ocean.
Ooh. Okay, I can keep going. All right, sounds good. One of the things that I really, that surprised me, but I really connected with, was the way you spoke about VIP, and that you made it really personal, but also we weren't wrestling with a dozen different qualifiers to everything. Was that something that you always communicated in your work, or was that something you developed through the book?
Yeah, a big part of it, definitely. Great. I think my mic is on. Should I wait also? Oh, I think it was their mic that was acting. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds phoned.
Hello. Yep. Hello.
Okay.
We're
Cool.
about the VIP centered approach.
Yeah. So basically, when I was writing this book, it's called My Child is Trans, but it is really for anyone who wants to support transgender people, whether it is an aunt or an uncle, a neighbor, a teacher, a doctor, even if someone who has like an adult child or another family member or sibling. So there's a lot in here. And I said, I don't know how to write about like, what do I call that person? Who is that person? And so I said, I'm going to call this person your VIP. So whoever you had on your mind, on your heart when you bought this book, that's your VIP, which was an easy shorthand to talk about the person that whoever the reader was. And, there it goes. And it also is a great way to remind people, hey, we are keeping this person at the center of this journey. There's a lot of intentionality behind the things I picked. And so the VIP I came up with originally for this book because I was really struggling with like, what do I call this person? It's like my word count is going so high just from every sentence being like, and so with the person that you had in mind, like that's a lot, that's a mouthful. Yeah. And so I came up with it for the book, but definitely plan to use it a lot more in my speaking because I think it's fun, it's helpful. I really like it.
Yeah, I did too. I thought it was really relatable. As you were talking about the VIP, I love the way you centered the transgender person, the VIP in all of this. And there were so many times, and I think this is, as a non-binary person and a parent, it's so important to remember that, especially as a parent, it's not our story to tell. We have our own story, but that we need to center the person coming out to us and sharing with us. And you did such a great job kind of walking through that and explaining that. But one of the things you touched on multiple times was the exhaustion that transgender and non-binary people can experience having to educate other people. And I think this book is a great resource. I know that this is now one of my top let's hand this out books. It is the top. This is the one to hand out because I think it covers all the different scenarios and details really effectively. But as a professional transgender educator, I'm sure you've had points of exhaustion and felt that. What are some ways that you have coped with that or have developed self-care to kind of still be able to support others and educate others and take care of yourself?
Yeah, that is a question that definitely has been a couple of years of therapy in the making. I will say that that is a big part of why I wrote this book too, was because I didn't have anything that I could say, I don't want to answer that, so just go here. I could say, just go look it up, but there weren't actually great resources online. Even right now, I think of like day one allies. I'll go into Google and type, what is transgender? About half of the top results are sponsored misinformation from anti-trans groups. And then it's all like HRC, Trevor Project, every website, every organization you could think of has a slightly different definition of all these words. To be a brand new ally is really hard. And people who have been in this work for a long time really don't give a lot of credit to people who are at the very beginning of their journey and how hard that is. So I wrote this book so that I could have something to hand to people, and so that other trans kids didn't have to be that resource for themselves. They don't have to be the adults that they needed to show up for them. So in terms of how I find my peace, there are a lot of big things that I do. In general, when I first started this work, I noticed that I was getting pretty exhausted pretty regularly. I was giving tons and tons of speeches, getting really, really raw on Zoom calls with lawyers with their cameras off, like just draining my batteries all the time. And so I came up with this system that I call my battery system. And I think of myself as having 4 or 5 different batteries. So I have my physical battery, my social battery, my educator battery, and my trans battery. And I would look at my week and I would say, all right, what things do I think are going to recharge and drain different batteries? And so hanging out with my friends would refill my social battery, but drain my physical battery. Going to a support group would refill my trans battery, but drain my social battery. And so I was really, at first I would like draw it out every week of like, okay, I noticed that by Thursday, I'm going to be running on empty for my social battery. So what can I plan on Friday? And I wrote out lists for myself of what are my like quick emergency charges for like my physical battery is empty and I have a whole day ahead of me. How can I get that quick charge? And what do I do to restore that in the long term? And I plan out my week so that I'm never hitting empty on anything. So a couple of the strategies that are great kind of recharging things for me. One of the big ones is having a no list. People love to say, you don't owe anybody education. You don't owe someone that answer. And that's really gratifying to say. It feels so good to say, educate yourself. That's not my job. And now what? And now you have a person who genuinely seems like they probably want to show up for you. And now they're feeling even more isolated, disconnected, less interested in being an ally because it feels like, what's the point if people are already mad at me for trying to learn? It's not realistic to say, like, I'm mad at you for asking. It's realistic to say, I don't have the energy to answer. So pick your 5 favorite resources and have somebody say, I don't have the time or the energy to answer that question right now. Here's my favorite book on this topic. Here is, you want to know about my personal story. I don't have the energy to talk about my deepest fears, my biggest regrets, but there's a YouTuber with a 10-minute video that has a similar identity to me and a story I really resonate with that I think you might really enjoy. Develop your no list, because you don't have to answer any question, but to meet somebody with aggression because they're trying to learn is not going to help you in the long run. We are trying to build allies. So having those no resources has been great. I also have all my favorite traditions. Any speech that or any place that I go to travel for a speech, I have to get a milkshake while I'm in that city. So if any of you want to tell me later what the best milkshake is around here, please let me know. I get a milkshake anywhere I go. I read a lot of books that are science fiction and fantasy with trans protagonists in worlds where transphobia is not really a thing. I love to know that trans people can also be romping around in space and lost in the desert with swords and whatever it is. It's just fun for me to get to escape and bring my identity and my story along with me. So I find a lot of excuses to play wherever I can.
That's fantastic. Well, you've brought up books. So do you have a good recommendation for science fiction or fantasy book with trans protagonists? Okay, please share.
Becky Chambers is my favorite author ever, and she has a delightful book called A Psalm for the Wild Built. It is a novella. I have read it, honestly, probably close to 50 times at this point. It is essentially a post-apocalypse world. The apocalypse kind of happened. All of the robots working in the factories got up and walked into the woods because they didn't like how they were being treated. Humanity said, oh wow, we're not doing a very good job, became a total like environmental paradise. And so there is this non-binary tea monk that is the main character who is feeling really exhausted and needs to, like, leaves their whole convent to become a tea monk and travel around meeting with people. And one of those robots comes out of the woods and says, hey, it's been a couple hundred years. The robots wanted to check on you all. How's humanity? And so it is this robot and this tea monk traveling the world, trying to figure out, what does humanity need right now? It is a story about rest, about identity, about advocacy work, and means to represent a whole group of people. It is a really delightful story, and everything Becky Chambers writes is very like queer normative. There are lots of alternative family structures and gender identities. A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is also great. So that is my top, is A Psalm for the Wild Built. Great book.
Thank you so much. That's great. As you've traveled, you've been traveling around. I don't know if we talked about this at the beginning or before, but you said you've been going around for the last month on this this book tour. Has there been anything that really, the whole book is great. I think it's all worth reading, even for people who have been through this and understand. I think that they're constantly centering on your VIP is really helpful context. But is there something that's really resonated with people that you maybe were, I know you've been doing this work for a long time, but that you were surprised by, or something that stood out to you that's really resonated with people who have read it so far?
That's a good question. I think there are things that have really resonated in different cities. And so like I had a lot of really interesting conversations in Seattle. My event in Seattle was more than 50% like refugee families who had fled Texas and Florida, I think was where they were all from. And so we were talking a lot about guilt and leaving and keeping your kids safe, but feeling like you had left other kids behind. There are so many different people I've gotten to meet. So it's hard to say if there was something that really surprised me. It is a really good question. I'm kind of stumped by that one, honestly. It's different pieces have been really meaningful to different people. There's a section that has been really helpful, which is chapter 10, which is understanding the foundations of current stigma. So that one definitely I have ended up leaning on a lot, because people ask me like, how did we get into this mess? And I love that I have something I can point to, because a lot of people I think assume that this book isn't that big. It is a primer. They assume it's maybe not going to talk about politics, but it absolutely does, because that's the world we're living in right now.
Yep. And I know you're fighting legislation where you are and around the country, and we are here as well. I think a lot of families with trans kids, and especially when their kids first come out, feel overwhelmed and maybe hopeless with the political climate and environment. Is that do you have anything to say to them, or to say to people who feel hopeless about kind of the current state of affairs?
Yeah, it is really easy to feel hopeless right now, and that is not by accident. Did you know that for each individual negative word in a headline, you are significantly more likely to click on and read that news article? Rough translation: bad news makes advertising revenue. The worse you feel, the more money CNN makes. Social media is very similar. When you see a Facebook post that makes you feel happy and hopeful, you like that post, and then you say, maybe the world is okay. I should go outside. I should see a friend. But when you see a post that makes you angry and afraid and desperate and hopeless, you leave 35 comments and you stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning waiting for the next sick burn that you can drop in that comment, because this one's really going to do it. Facebook makes more money when you are upset. It is not a coincidence that we all feel kind of awful the more time we spend reading the news, being online. I, for so long, was ready to find hate everywhere that I went. I travel everywhere for my work. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and I travel. There's nowhere I won't travel. I have given speeches at steel mills 4 hours outside of the nearest city. And everywhere I go, expecting to find hate because of what I've seen online, I find curiosity, I find fear, I find shame. There's a lot of big emotions that come up, but rarely do I find actual hate. But good news doesn't make headlines. Good news doesn't make people click on things, doesn't make them stay on the website. So we talk a lot about how there were over 500 anti-trans bills proposed this year, proposed last year. We don't talk about how last year there were 96 of those bills passed, and this year there have only been 41. Not the same energy there. So many of those bills also are duplicates, were never meant to get a hearing, were just meant to show people how extreme people were willing to go. One of the anti-trans bills we're tracking in Missouri is a bill that would void every marriage, even the straight ones. But that didn't get reported on because it was never meant to get a hearing. It was just meant for someone to prove to their base how far they were willing to go. There's no energy. Even the other Republicans in Missouri said, this is ridiculous. We're not doing that. They made fun of that guy a lot for that bill. So much of this, bad news makes headlines. Bad news gets clicks. There are so many victories we are seeing that if you're not on the ground, if you're not involved, you're not going to see. In Kansas, just a couple of weeks ago, we were ready for the gender affirming care ban to pass. They passed it out of the legislature, went to the governor's desk, she vetoed it, and we knew it was a veto-proof majority. So we were ready for them to override her veto and pass it. And right before that was going to happen, two Republican, very Republican senators stood up, and one of them said, I was told that this bill was about protecting families, keeping kids safe, making the best medical decisions. I have spoken to those families. I have spoken to the doctors. I have learned the research, and I have realized this is not keeping kids safe. It is not doing what I thought I did, what I thought it was, and I'm sorry. And for that reason, I reject this vote and I uphold the governor's veto. So gender affirming care is legal in Kansas. We are seeing that kind of position switching from even people who previously voted for these bills, realizing it's not doing what they thought it was. These bills are not popular. We bring hundreds of people to testify against anti-trans legislation in Missouri, and they have between 4 and 10 people there to testify in support, half of which are often flown in from other states. There is not support for these bills. The internet makes it feel like everyone has picked a side, like everyone hates us. But when you get involved, especially locally, when you get involved and meet people, talk to people, other human beings face to face, there's not that hate that you're looking for. You can find hate. If you go out and look for it, you can find it. But if you look for curiosity, for love, for people who want to be accepting and don't know where to start, you're going to find a whole lot more of that. I go through a lot of emotions in this political nonsense that's happening. But never have I been hopeless because I've been involved. And I know that it is simultaneously so much worse and so much better than so many people seem to think. It is totalitarian, it is terrifying, and it is not popular. And that's really important to recognize.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me, I think we're probably getting close to time. Okay. Can I ask one more question? Okay. Tell me, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this work? You've written a book, you've been speaking. Why do you do it?
Yeah. When I was growing up, there were not other transgender people around me, especially not adults, and certainly not happy ones. Not on the TV shows I was watching, not on the news, not in my community. I did not know that it was possible to be transgender and grow up and be happy. And so I kind of assumed that I was just going to disappear sometime in my early 20s. I did not know that I would make it past college because I had never seen it before. And then the summer after my freshman year of college, I saw an off-Broadway play with my dad that featured a trans actor. He was a romantic lead. He had a happy ending, and my mind was blown. I spent the whole show sitting in my seat, planning out everything I was going to say to him after the show. I was going to say, Ian, I've never seen someone like myself represented on a stage before. It gives me so much hope for myself and for my future as a trans man. Thank you. We'd take a picture, he'd sign my playbill, it'll be great. I'm all ready. We come into this lobby room after. I'm on one side, he's on the other. I take one look at him, I open my mouth, and I just start sobbing. I could not get a word out. And he sees me from across the room. He walks through the whole crowd. He starts crying, and he just pulls me in. And we stand there crying in each other's arms, not saying a word, but understanding everything we needed to know about each other. And after 2 or 3 minutes, he stepped back, and he said, this is it. This is why representation matters. And he told me the story of how he had the exact same thing happen to him 20 years before the first time he saw a transgender person on stage, and the difference that made for him. And in that moment, I said, okay, that's it for me. Everything I'm going to do from this moment onwards is to the goal of being that for as many people as possible. being the reason a kid can look at me and say, oh, I can be trans and grow up and find love and find joy. And I got to tell that story at a high school recently in small town Massachusetts. And I told the story to the assembly, and then the bell rang to send the kids off to their buses. So I came down off the stage and started packing up my bag. And when I turned around to leave, there was a line of 40 kids waiting for a hug. My first thought was gratitude. How amazing is it that I get to be that for all of those kids, that I got to create this moment for them? And then I had a much more humbling thought. That moment didn't start when I got to this school. It didn't end when I left this school either. The fact that they had the knowledge to understand, to connect with what I was saying, the fact that they had the safety to be seen asking for that hug, knowing what it would tell their peers, that wasn't built by me. That was built by their parents, by their teachers, by their community members, by all the people around them, putting their arms around them and saying, I want to see you grow up. I want to see you thriving and successful and above all else, joyful. I get to travel to every corner of this country, to every corner of this world, talking to people in tiny towns, in dark red states, in bright blue states, in huge cities, moms in Russia joining webinars under pseudonyms because they can't have people know that they were on this call. People everywhere doing everything they can, fighting with all that they have to build a better future for their LGBTQ plus loved ones. And people who say, I don't know how to support my kid. I don't know what any of this means, but I want to try. I'm ready to start. The fact that I can go everywhere, every part of this country, and meet people who show up to these events, who ask questions, who have open hearts and host me at their bookstores, that is how I know, not for a hope, not for some far-fetched dream, but for a fact that we will build a world where every single kid gets to grow up and be loved and seen and joyful exactly as they are by default. So thank you all for being the reason that I get to stay hopeful. I know that I can't do this on my own, but the fact that I know that I'm doing it with all of you is how I know that we'll make it there. So thank you all. This has been really, really exceptional.
Thank you so much. And thank you for writing this book. Thanks for the time, taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
ER, do we have questions online? No.
Yes, we have one question. What do you see the relationship between as between joy and advocacy?
That is a fantastic question. They have to exist at the same place. If you do advocacy from a place of rage, it's meaningful and you will burn out so fast. I've been an advocate for 4 years. That's not an easy feat. And a big part of that is because my advocacy is rooted in joy, in part because it means that I'm not always fighting. There are times where I'm celebrating, both celebrating the victories and just celebrating being alive, celebrating that they haven't been able to wipe me off the face of the earth to get me to leave my state and leave my community. So joy sustains me and it drives my advocacy. I fight much harder and much better because I know I'm building something. It's really hard for me to talk to people who we would write off as hateful or write off as anti-trans when my goal is just stop doing that. That's really hard. And it's hard for people to know what to do with that. I don't know what to ask of them beyond just no, change, be different. But when I understand what I'm building, it's much easier to get through to someone to say, here's what we stand to gain. Wouldn't you love a world where, you have a more equitable relationship with your spouse, where you get to decide what your relationship with your identity is? Things aren't as scary as you think they are. This is what the goals are. That is such a meaningful place of advocacy. So I think there is so much of a place. There's a lot of emotions. I'm not saying that I'm never angry or upset. There are plenty of things I do from a place of rage, but advocating from a place of joy makes me so much more effective and much more sane. And that's really important too.
I want to make sure that I read the whole message, which is, this is from Anuradha Chatterjee, who is, I think, Ben Ackerley's friend. She says, shout out from 1427 Main Street, hugs to Winnie. And can't wait to read the book, Benji. So
thank you.
Yeah. Do any of our folks here in the room have any questions?
I also like to highlight again, nothing is off limits. You can ask about my medical transition, my parents, my marriage, religion, anything that is on your heart and on your mind. I'm thrilled to talk about.
You get to go to what kind of schools do you get to go to? How young? I have a 7-year-old transgender boy. can't imagine anybody like you being able to come to our school.
Yeah.
Did you get to go to?
Yeah, I have been to
What
elementary schools, I have worked with preschools, I work with staff, and I work with the students. There are different ways that I talk about it when I'm talking to different aged kids. I did get to teach a fourth grade sex ed class that I came in and I was like, okay, who here has ever heard of transgender? And all the kids raised their hands and looked at me like I was the stupidest person alive. And they were like, yeah, what's a polyamorous triad? And I was like, who told you that? They all got it so much more than any adult that I have ever met. It is not actually that hard for kids to conceptualize this. It doesn't mean there are like, I'm going to talk to a 7-year-old differently than I'll talk to an 11-year-old, differently than I'll talk to a 25-year-old or a 60-year-old. But I absolutely have had the privilege of getting to talk to kids of any age and to talk to the teachers about, kids are going to be saying this either way. The question is just, are you ready? Are they going to feel safe here? Not are they going to come out? They're going to come out. Are they going to be safe with you? So I love that I get to go to any age of school.
Are these in the north or south? And you get
anywhere.
Wow.
The fourth graders were in Missouri.
Wow.
Yeah, they were with it. They were awesome. They were classic kids. We had them write questions on Post-it notes. And so I have framed in my office one of the notes that a kid wrote, which says, "Why do you have no boobs?" If they're thinking it, all the adults are too. They're just afraid to ask it. But that is one of my honored possessions.
Well, one of the questions we usually ask to close out is, oh, great.
It's a comment. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Ben. I came because of you. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for writing the book. I'm a obviously Black mother of a trans child, and I just always want to know from a trans person, because there's only so much I can get from my kid who's 26 and very educated, has been educating me. It's not a problem, but I just wanted to hear anybody else's perspective, because the beginning of everything I learned was from my kid, and I just wanted to hear. And the other thing I wanted to mention, obviously, is just the reach with regards to just being Black. And I happen to be an immigrant, and I'm usually the one person in the room who's affirming that she's all Nigerians think every Nigerian today, except my kid, thinks I'm crazy, because it's not spoken of so much. So I'm not sure if that's more of a question or just a comment, and maybe just, I guess, keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. There is a book called Before We Were Trans that is really outstanding. There is something I hear a lot when I talk to, especially people who are children of immigrants and who are not white. I have a lot of people say, this seems like a white people thing. I hear that a lot. And so Before We Were Trans is an awesome book that talks about the history of the trans community. Almost every major culture in the world has, if you go far back enough, transness and queerness in their global mythology and religions and history. And then settler England came in and said, no, none of that anymore. Please stop. But our ideas of gender and sexuality, and that it's normal to be cisgender and normal to be heterosexual, those come from Victorian era England, not naturally formed by every culture around the world. So I highly recommend that folks check out stories from their own culture, from Nigeria, of transgender people and non-binary people and the ways that showed up. That can be a lot more meaningful to people to say, hey, it's not just a white people thing. This is something that shows up all over the world.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, one of the things I talk about all the time is how I got my dad to lean in to his first grandson. Being Nigerian, having the firstborn male is the shiznit. And so it was almost a huge attack on him, being a former 2-star general in the Nigerian Air Force. Just, oh my God, you mean my first grandson is no longer, what are you talking about? I had to go back to my own language, which is Igbo, to teach him again that we don't have gendered pronouns, just so he understands that everybody is actually they, them in my language. So that got him. And then I said, I remember how you always tell me that I have a man's heart, and I'm always acting. Everything I do is if you feel like I should have been a son. You know that? It's like, what if I was genderqueer? What if I'm really a boy? Like, I just put the doubt in him to say, you already told me I'm pretty much two-spirit. Like, I'm pretty much a boy, but I'm not. Do you see how I could also say, yes, I am a boy? And so he was able to lean in with the pronoun and then with just his own words coming back at him. I was like, oh, and now he's able to, on the surface, lean in a little bit to, okay, what again is this? What is this again? And so I got him that way. But thank you. I mean, once upon a time in old ancient Igbo land, women took wives, and it was not taking wives because they wanted to say, well, they're taking wives. No, they were not taking wives for their husband. They were taking wives for themselves. And I'm an Igbo woman. So I could have taken a wife. Was that polyamory? Was that lesbianism? What was it? And of course, whoever said, no, no, your religion is not good. Your culture is not good. Here's our religion. Here's our culture. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love that.
We do have one more question online, which is, do you think there's going to be another great migration because of politics, and specifically anti-trans politics?
Oh, yeah, we're already seeing that. Listen, we have an average estimate of between 130 and 260,000 LGBTQ plus people and their families who have fled their states to flee anti-trans politics. What I'd say is that we have this expression that we use, which is put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. And I think that's nice, but I think that doesn't capture everything. Think about somebody like Michael Phelps, right? That man is aquatic. He could probably hold his breath for like 10 minutes. He could probably help some other people put their oxygen masks on before putting his own on. I think a lot about the ways in which right now in Missouri, I'm Michael Phelps, because these bills, right now, all of our bills are focused on transgender young people. I'm over 18, which means right now I can hold my breath. I can be here fighting so that people who need to put their masks on can step back. There are also moments where it's not safe for me. So as an example of standards that we have as an advocacy community, transgender people do not go into legislative offices alone. We always go either in a group or with an ally. That is really important because it is not safe for me. I have to recognize the moments where I have to have my oxygen mask on and the moments where I can hold my breath. If we all just say, oh, people should just leave, why don't people just go to affirming states, the refugee states, the 13 states that have refugee protections for transgender and LGBTQ plus people, then those bills, no one is going to be left to stop them, and they will spread even further. Being in a place like Missouri, which is, I have now learned, is a proving ground for anti-trans legislation. They trial legislation in Missouri, and if it doesn't face too much backlash, then they propose it in other states. Many bills have been trial run in Missouri, so the fact that I can be there to fight them and stop them from going anywhere else is miraculous. Now, there's a list of bills that my wife and I know, if these get passed, we got to go. It is not safe for me. Those bills will target my life, my livelihood, and I need to find a way to leave to put my oxygen mask on. But as long as I can be holding my breath, I want to. So I think we are seeing that. I hope we won't have to. People shouldn't have to leave their homes, leave their communities because it is not safe for them. That isn't the answer. I think it is what we're seeing now, but I hope that will not be where we end up. And I think that it's not a terrible thing to want to stay, nor is it a terrible thing to want to leave. You should be allowed to be somewhere that feels safe and easy. You got to do what feels right for you. So I think that we will see it. I think we are seeing it and we'll continue to see it. And I love that I get to stay and fight as long as I can, because there are a lot of people who can't leave, who can't afford to leave, who don't want to leave. And that's all super valid too. I can get up and leave because I am a, white, fairly well off, married in a straight passing relationship. It would be easy for me to go and move somewhere, and predominantly people of color and trans people of color would be left behind. Of me saying, well, I can flee these bills because I can afford that. I don't want to just leave, people of color to foot the bill, as has happened so many times in historical movements. So as long as I can be here and fighting, I will be here and fighting.
So one of the things that we ask to close out is, we think about things as books as being on shelves, obviously, and shelves being a kind of curation and a kind of almost community, because books are objects, but they also are so much more than that. So when you think about your ideal bookshelf, where you want your book to be in community with other books, what are some books that you hope are sort of on the same shelf with your book?
That is an amazing question. obviously you wouldn't stock a real bookshelf like this because it's too many genres, but I think it would be a combination of educational texts like this one, like He, She, They by Skylar Baylor, Before We Were Trans by Kit Hayam, to really amazing nonfiction educational texts. I think it would also have a lot of really joy-centered books like Psalm for the Wild Built and The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas, stories that are really transnormative, that feature trans characters in fun fantasy worlds where they are not just being the subject of oppression, but also adventurers and heroes. Or books like A Shot in the Dark, romance stories that feature trans people as lovable, as desirable. Books like Becoming Who We Are, which is a graphic memoir of transgender people who are transgender adults who have been doing cool jobs and amazing advocacy work for decades. So many books that just highlight all the things the trans community could be. I think I would want it to be a cross-genre shelf to say, look at all of the different places our lives can go. Look at all of the things that we are building together. Those are just a handful of my favorites. It's a great question. I love that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for being with us. For folks who are watching at home, you can click the teal button to buy the book. My Child is Trans, Now What? You can just click it right here and you will be able to purchase it. And if you are here, we do have a question. How can folks get in touch with you to arrange to have you come to visit them?
Absolutely. Reach out to me for anything that you want. I will give you book recommendations. I will come to speak at your company. I will come to speak at your school or at your support group for free. I also do a lot of free coaching for parents and families of trans kids. The word coaching makes it seem like a business thing. It is not. That means I will get on the phone with you as long as you need. I will talk to your grandparents. I will talk to your kids. Any way I can lift you up. All I want to do is maximize my good. You can reach out to me through my website, bgtranstalks.com. My email is the same at Gmail. I'm also on TikTok as TikTok's trans older brother. Pseudo bro is my handle. I think it's clever. I've been told it's a little confusing, but I'm sticking with it because it's on too many YouTube videos at this point to change.
So www.bgtranstalks.com.
Yes.
All right. We'll put that in the chat for folks.
Could I add one?
Yes, please do.
I've loved reading this book. This is the go-to resource now. I would love to put in a plug for finding a local community and support as well, because I think this is a great place to start. But I think that finding community with other parents and caregivers and allies is kind of the next step. That this is a great place to start. This actually has your personal stories can provide that connection, but I think getting in the room with people or getting on a Zoom call is also incredibly helpful and can bring so much joy and like relief for many people. Yeah. And so plug for transparentusa.org. We have online Zoom groups for anyone across the US, and then we also have local chapters around the country.
Yes, don't try to do this alone. You are not the first one. You will not be the last. Not the first in your town, in your church, in your school, in your community. It might feel like you're the first. You're not. So find the other people who are going through it with you, who have gone through it before you, who will go through it after you. Connect with them. That is so powerful, so joyful. I really appreciate you making that plug.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
Thanks, everyone. So we're going to say goodbye to our